Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. We can get started. So our focus today is going to be to talk about the OpenIAM identity governance solution, and also in the context of the release that we just put out last week, right? So this is um, the 4212 release, which is kind of been in the works for a little while. And since we have a bit of a mixed audience today, so we have some people who are already actively deploying OpenIAM or have been using it for a while, and some people who are pretty new to it. So we're going to kind of use this, basically start from the beginning. We'll basically, create some foundation in terms of why people are deploying IGA solutions. And then we'll start to focus more on how OpenIAM can solve those problems. And about halfway through, we'll do a short demo about how we can, implement some common use cases, the features which are there in the current release. And then we'll wrap up with kind of talking about what's up next, meaning the short-term roadmap, things that we're going to be coming out with, in the second half of this year. Okay. I like to keep these things interactive. And so if you have questions, feel free to post and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay. So when we look at the current landscape, and I think this applies to most of the environments of the folks who are on this call, that you're either mid to large enterprises, and we have a landscape now where things are basically some systems are on-prem. We have some applications which are from like cloud providers, so some SaaS solutions, right? Things like Workday, Office 365, ServiceNow, Slack. But also companies are using increasingly the cloud platforms like AWS and Azure and Google. And there are others depending on which part of the world that you're in. And so as time goes on, the use of these cloud services is starting to increase significantly, but we still have an on-prem world that we need to manage as well. It hasn't 100% moved one way or the other, right? And in doing so, we have some new challenges, which is, one, identity information now is being propagated outside of the corporate, network. And in fact, it's being, stored with other providers in many cases. The complexity to kind of manage the user lifecycle is significantly higher. And now it's become even more complex because a lot of companies are in a remote or a hybrid work environment, right? So people are also connecting in remotely. So the need to enforce the security and to lock down access is significantly more important today than it ever was, right? And at the same time, we want to improve efficiency, right? We want to have people gain access, when they need it. So last thing that you want is somebody coming into a company having to wait a day or two to get all the access that they need. And similarly, we also need to simplify the effort to do compliance work. So a lot of our customers have SOC reviews every quarter, and those who have not implemented an IAM solution, we often hear from them that they're spending weeks or months kind of getting ready for these reviews. This is the process of extracting the data, the sending out Excel spreadsheets, have people review them. It's just a really time-consuming and a very disruptive process, right? And overall, we want to help people become more efficient, right? Both end users and IT staff. We want to increase the overall productivity of each person, right? So with that in mind, let's just take a kind of walk through a little bit of some of the feature set that's in OpenIAM. And again, I'm focusing a lot more on the IGA side. There is a second part of the product, which is the web access management and also the customer IAM part. We'll talk about that at a different day. So the most fundamental thing that we do is manage user lifecycle. This is the ability to kind of integrate with one or more source systems, being able to take that data and based on some criteria to be able to grant some birthright access, right? The things that people are always supposed to have to be able to do their jobs. And so for that, we'll take a look at the overall solution, but we're able to integrate with these systems, bring in that data, have rules which can determine what you're supposed to get, and be able to provision them to the downstream systems. There are also tools to be able to do reconciliation and manage orphans, right? And for end users, there's a self-service portal that allows you to do a variety of things from creating new requests, approve requests, to viewing your profile. There are quite a few other features in there now as well, right? And the other part is that there's a pretty significant piece which is kind of workload driven. So your common use cases, from your new hires to your position changes and terminations, their default workflow templates, which are there, which can be used to have request approval processes, which you can kind of define per your requirements. But also the workflow gives you a place where you can introduce new logic that you may have, which is a little bit different from here. Like, so maybe you need to interact with other systems or have other steps. So the workflow engine can be used for those kind of integrations as well. Okay. Everything that you'll see that in the demo, that everything that we're doing is being tracked in the audit logs, right? So you'll be able to see when a request came in, where it started, and all the access that the person's supposed to get. And all of this is going to really drive the access certification piece, right? To be able to pull in the information from the various systems, which is the evidence collection part, and then to be easily able to configure a campaign, which will send out the messages to the appropriate reviewers, give them an easy way of kind of comparing access, and to be able to kind of approve or reject. And one of the common themes here is that everything that we do on the OpenIAM side, it is exposed to the REST API. So we're seeing a different group of customers, over the last year, where they're building custom applications and they want to embed identity in it. And so in that case, really, from an OpenIAM perspective, everything that we can do from our UI, you can do from the REST API. So it gives you a fair amount of flexibility about kind of building, a layer, on top of this to kind of, provide that identity information. Okay, so if I look at what the diagram of OpenIAM looks like internally, this is pretty close. It's a containerized architecture or microservices architecture, depending on how you're deploying it. And for a quick summary, all the things which are in blue, those are IGA specific services or functionality that OpenIAM is kind of developed and is part of the overall solution. Everything that's in gray are infrastructure components that we've kind of packaged in with it. So RabbitMQ is the message bus, so all the services talk to each other using RabbitMQ. Vault is where all the secrets are being kept, and this is it's actually HashiCorp's Vault, which is being used. Janus Graph is a graph database, so the entitlements, which have a hierarchical structure, are stored in there. And there's Redis Cache and Elasticsearch, which are also used, for performance reasons. But Elasticsearch is also used to kind of store the audit logs as well. Okay, and the way that we talk to our different systems is through connectors, and this is kind of a growing list. And I think this graphic kind of provides a partial summary. I don't think this is complete, but you kind of get the idea, right? And let's skip past this. So let's talk a little bit about how we can deploy OpenIAM. So there's a few choices here. So on one hand, for companies which are not ready to adopt a containerized approach, we still support an RPM-based model. So you can use Red Hat Linux, or you can use CentOS, and you can deploy using an RPM file. And you can do both a single node and a multi-node deployment. There's a fair amount of flexibility here in an RPM type of deployment. Besides the HA capabilities, you can also take these different containers that we have and move them around. So depending on the size of your deployment, you could potentially separate out the service layer from the UI layer. But in some cases, you can also take things like RabbitMQ, Redis, Elasticsearch, and move them off into a separate cluster itself, which can be used by the rest of the infrastructure. Right? So depending on your needs, it can cause, we can have a very flexible deployment architecture using an RPM model.
Docker Swarm, I tend to look at this as more like a quick, like a POC type of a deployment model. It's very, very fast. It doesn't require great technical skills. And generally, you should be up and running within an hour, right? And you can deploy on Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu. It's really easy. All you need is a Docker Hub account, pull it down and run a few commands, and you're really up. Most of your time is going to be spent on either pulling down the Docker images or to going through the startup process. Okay. The next two are a bit more complex. If you so we you can deploy in a Kubernetes environment both on actually on AWS, Azure, and on Google Cloud. For AWS and Google, there are Terraform scripts which are there, which will build out the full environment for you. For Azure, that's still pending, but there are Helm charts there, which will simplify your deployment. And then you have OpenShift. OpenShift was added in this release, and we have started to see a few customers kind of go down this path in terms of deploying on this platform. So there are some additional services and additional complexities that come with it. But for if you want to do a containerized deployment and you want high availability, we would recommend using one of these two. And we would strongly urge you not to use Docker Swarm just because some of the components like Elasticsearch and Redis don't really cluster that well in a Swarm environment. So if I were to look at if I were to deploy in a Kubernetes environment on AWS and I use AWS as a platform, then my deployment architecture could look something like this. So now there's a caveat here, which is if you want to, you can deploy everything on one node if you want. Okay, so, and if you're doing a POC, you can certainly do that, and you can set up the Terraform scripts so that they put everything onto one node. But in a production setting, you have the option to use the platform if you want. And so, and what I mean by that is you can use the database services that AWS offers. And by the way, everything that I'm saying here applies for Google and Azure as well. You could also use the Redis service and Neptune, which is the Janus Graph. And this way you can kind of scale out and leverage the platform. I've left out Elasticsearch from this diagram for this particular release because the current version of Elasticsearch that AWS has a bug in it, which doesn't work too well with the Spring adapter that's there. It's not there in the version of Elasticsearch that you get from Elasticsearch, but it is there in the AWS version. So hopefully that's resolved soon. And when that is, you'll be able to use that as a platform as well. If you want to scale and you want better performance, it's highly recommended that you would use their platform. And down the road, it will also open up the option for you if you wanted to do like a multi-region deployment, right? Trying to do a multi-region deployment using our own containers is certainly possible, but it's just a lot more work in terms of the configuration and management overall, right? Okay, so now if we kind of take that architecture, scale it out a little bit and say, well, if I have, sorry, if I have things which are running in the cloud and things which are running on-prem, what would that look like, right? So again, there's options in how we can do this, but one way is that if you have OpenIAM running on AWS or one of the cloud platforms, then you can have a VPN tunnel open up from the cloud to the on-prem world, and on the on-prem side, you could have a couple of connector VMs, which is where all the connectors would reside. So the benefit of doing it this way is that the cloud instance of OpenIAM will only know about these two connector VMs. It won't really know anything or have any direct way of getting to any of your applications, right? So only your connector layer will be able to talk to those target applications. So this way you create an extra layer of security from the outside, to the on-prem world, right? For your cloud integrations, it's a lot simpler. You can just have another, Windows VM, which is running, in your cloud platform. And that could be talking to all your Microsoft applications. And the Linux connectors, you can have either a separate VM or it could be running on the same, cluster that you have already. Okay. And if we, go on-prem, it changes a little bit. Everything's on-prem. We don't need the VPN. We don't need the extra connector VMs, right? So that it changes, but again, it depends what our objectives are. Some companies want everything running in the cloud.
And that's part of the longer term objective, right? So in that case, it makes sense to put it up there. Okay. So a couple other features which are, we kind of complement the overall solution. So there is an AD password filter, and this is a small, basically a DLL in a way, if you want to look at it, which is loaded into AD. And so this way, when password changes come in from your Windows desktop, it'll get picked up. It will sync it back to the OpenIAM service layer, and that service layer will then propagate it to everybody else. Okay? And then similarly, there's a credential provider. This is available for both Mac and Windows. And so this basically replaces the login functionality that comes with both of those operating systems. And you can introduce, the OpenIAM component, which has a forgot password capability, and also is linked to the adaptive auth. So we can start doing things like, multi-factor authentication, use the mobile app to do push notification, things like that. Okay. And this is just kind of last couple of slides of kind of talking about, being able to do the access certification. We'll go into this into the demo a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here on the slides. And yeah, let's just skip past this. And any questions so far? Okay, so let's log into the OpenIAM admin interface, and then we can proceed from there, right? So the first thing that I want to do is kind of talk a little bit about how we kind of configured a few things. Okay. So first of all, what I didn't mention, so if the interface has been localized, sorry. So the interface has already been kind of localized, and also if you needed to rebrand this and kind of change it, that you can certainly do that as well. And there's different degrees of how deep we can go with that type of customization. So right now we're kind of landing into the self-service, page. Let's just go to the admin console. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of bulk create, we're going to bulk create a bunch of users. And the idea is to kind of simulate what would happen like in an HR system, right? So to get going, we basically set up a few connectors. So if we go into this menu option here, click on Manage Systems, we'll see a number of active connections, right? So we'll see some connectors are up, some are down. And the idea is that if, there's a health check going on, and so things which are in green, those connections are healthy. Things which are in red, they are not healthy. If the connectors are down, then we can certainly configure it so that it can kick off an alert to let someone know that there is a problem, right? So, so we see these connections being up, and next thing we did was we set up some roles. So if I were to go to my menu option here for a role, and let's say I pick up, something like, let's just say end user, or let's just say help desk. Probably bad name. Too many things loaded in here for me to find what I'm looking for. Let's say we just pick up a role here. And so with that role, say if you look at the role entitlements, it can have, in this case, this role doesn't do anything, but if I wanted to, I can say add, something like say manage system and Active Directory. So at this point, becoming a member of this role would put me into, would create an account for me in AD. And let's see if I wanted to do something more, I can say, I can assign some group memberships here. And so at this point, I've started to build out this role where this role, I'm going to get an AD account, I'm going to get this group membership as well. And in this respect, I can build out this role to have multiple applications that I'm going to provision to, and it can have entitlements within them that I would basically be defining. I can also be defining access rights, which would give me, like say, specific entitlements within that object, right? So if I want to say set like a read-write access, or if I'm in banking and I want to set a certain, say, a approval limit on a loan, those kind of things could be defined here as well. Okay. And so once I start creating my RBAC model, the next thing I did was I created some business rules to define my birthright access. So there is a few rules here, like say admin, developer, manager. And if I were to open up one of these, it basically says, if my job title is equal to manager, then I'm going to execute this condition here, which when it matches. And when it stops being manager, I can execute another object, which will basically take away that access from me, right? And so this is a super simple expression that's here but you can use this to do something more complex. You can say, for example, if my job code is in a range of and I can include a range of job, codes or titles, and I'm in a certain part of the world, and my status is something else, right? I can put in a whole bunch of criteria, and if they match, at that point, I'm going to get certain access, right? And in this way, you can define the birthright access that your employees should have. And in some of our customers, we're also using this to be able to define non-employee access, right? So people who are external users and what they should get on certain criteria. And it's an easy way to be able to define this. It's easy to maintain because there's no coding involved and no scripting involved, right? And you can define things in this way. And then, so if you look at these matches down below, so let's take a look at the manager. So in this case, we're seeing that the manager node is adding a person to a couple of Azure groups, to a couple of AD groups, and adding them to some AWS memberships, right? And I'm also enabling SSO. And if I wanted to add more, I can add an action like this, and I can say, well, these are some various things that I can do, right? So this becomes a relatively easy way to kind of start defining the birthright access. So once I've done this, I've got a reasonable foundation in place, then I'm ready to basically bulk process these. Okay. Okay, so there's a question that says, I noticed the business rules options is not in the last community edition. Will this be included in the new version? At this time, no. The business rules engine will stay in the enterprise version until the current version becomes the community version, which won't be until probably the end of the year, when there's a significant new enterprise release comes out. Yeah. So this will continue to stay in that. Okay. Thank you. So let's go to the synchronization. And so the synchronization feature in OpenIAM does really two things. You can use it to bulk load a variety of objects, like users, groups, roles. Really anything that OpenIAM supports, you can kind of bulk load in using the synchronization engine. You can also use it to drive the automated provisioning and deprovisioning process, which is what we're going to do here. So here we have, we're going to be using a CSV file. We created a test file here, which has got 3 users. It's got webinar users 1, 2, and 3. Each one has a unique employee ID. And there's a status here, what kind of worker they are. And these titles will trigger basically the business rules to kind of give you the access that you have. Okay. And so let's go to the sync here. So in this case, we're basically manually loading the file. But in real life, you can tell it to basically look at the file at a certain location, and kind of automatically process this in regular intervals. And if you're going to hit a HR system, like a Workday or SAP HR, then you would just set up a scheduled task of when this is supposed to run, and it will go ahead and fire in that way. Right. So if I'm going to do a preview, I can see the users that are in the file. And at this point, I'm going to say do a sync now. and in a couple of seconds, they should, they should get going, right? So let's, okay, so if I look at these, there's some users that are created, and so let's take a look at. So actually, let's grab a different user. 1 second. Okay, so we see that this user has been created, and then if we look down into identities, you'll see that they've been provisioned into a Postgres database, AD, and a Linux server, right? And if we look at the entitlements, you'll see that all the accounts that were created, when they were created, so they have a start date that goes with it, and this is all the business rules which are kind of have triggered off, the access that you have, right? And if we were to change one of these attributes, like the job title, for example, then the access that is no longer needed for the new job the person has, it would be taken away, and the new access would be granted. Okay. So at this point, let's log out of this, and let's just log in for the first time. So right now, the configuration is for me to change my password. You can define this however we need to. Okay, so now I'm in the self-service portal, and the access that I have in the portal, just like access that I have elsewhere, is based on my role. So, okay, so the question is, can I assign access rights directly to the identity or just to the role? Good question. So we support both direct entitlement and also access our entitlements through a role. So you don't have to go through a role model, and in fact, a role model doesn't always really hold up in a lot of our customers because they just haven't defined a comprehensive, RBAC model, right? So in that respect, we do need the flexibility, and also when we're access and requesting things from the server's catalog, you are actually doing a direct entitlement, right? So if so from the self-service portal, we can go, and view access. This is the same thing that I saw on the admin side. If I was a manager and I had direct reports, I would see them all here, and I could create requests, review access. Now, this is an area that's going to grow significantly in the next release, and we get to the roadmap. And this is in the 4213 release, where there is going to be an ability to kind of manage contractors from here as well. So you'll be able to change their last dates, reassign contractors to different people. So it'd be a lot of flexibility for contractors. Okay, so there's a question: can user requests from self-service portal be driven or triggered, integrated into ServiceNow? The short answer is yes. And then there's generally 2, maybe 3 ways that we can do this. So one way is, imagine that if the service catalog is in ServiceNow, and in that respect, there's a couple of different ways to feed that. And one is through the OpenIAM API layer, or through some other means into ServiceNow itself, right? And so people can go through the workflows in ServiceNow, and when the approvals are complete, then it will basically provision it in OpenIAM. That's one way of doing it, and there are some pros and cons to doing it that way, and I'll explain that in a second. The second way, which is what a lot of customers do, which is they use the OpenIAM portal, which is designed to do the identity work, you go through the approvals, and when they're complete, things which need to be provisioned manually, they are sent to ServiceNow, and they can be sent to ServiceNow either by sending an email to a mailbox that's monitored, or we can call the API and kind of invoke that a ticket be created in ServiceNow, right? So there's two different ways. I personally like that second approach better, and there's a reason why. So one of the challenges that we have is that we want to consolidate the audit information into one place. When we move the requesting of the access and the approval mechanism in ServiceNow, you're basically creating a significant amount of work for yourself to have to recreate the functionality which is already in your IGA solution. And now you've moved your approval workflow, the audit logs, into a different system. So when you need to do your SOC 2 audit, you have to go and look for data in two different places. And it basically defeats the purpose of simplifying the whole compliance process, right? So again, I've seen it done both ways. More and more of our customers are doing it the second way, largely for the reasons which I just described. A lot of people are using ServiceNow. Ultimately, probably, by the end of the year, there will be a native module that we have that you'll be able to plug in directly into ServiceNow, which will allow you to do the request approval stuff. And that will allow people to pick and choose which interface you want to work with, but it will keep the audit logs in OpenIAM, and you'll have to do like basically no work on the ServiceNow side to do the integration. Okay. All right. So going back to this demo, let's go into my info, and here we see some options, about requesting access. So let's go ahead and create some access. And so at this point, either Elmer Fudd can go and request his own access, or his manager or somebody else who's authorized they can come here and do it, right? And we have this category structure, and each category can have subcategories. This is defined by you to, whatever makes sense for your business, right? So in this case, I'm going to say directories, and I'm going to say, PowerShell, and then I'm going to see all the things which are in AD. So now if I scroll down, I'm going to see some groups here. And actually, this is column here called max duration. So max duration is basically maintaining a value of how long you can have access to something. So in this case, this is 5 hours. In these other cases, there's no predefined limit. So if I have sensitive access, I can define how long I can gain access to it from. Okay. So let's just pick a couple of these, and I'll put them in the cart. And so here, if I want to, I can also say, well, I'm looking for this for, say 30 days, right? And I'm looking, I can save this, and then I'm looking for this one to be unlimited, right? And I can have a justification here, and go test, and then the questions that you see down here, this is really based on the, if you have, questions or justification questions which are specific to an application. Okay. So in this case, if it all looks okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. And at this point, I can go ahead and, I can approve it. So if I look at my requests, this is kind of keeping like a history of my open requests. And I can see that it went to Jack. And so, I can go ahead and approve. And go from there. So let's log in as the first approver. So I can also, so I'm going to approve this right here from our UI. So from, let's go to this. I can look at the details here. Now I can approve all this full request if I want to. Or I can say, well, I'm not going to approve this, but I'm going to approve the other one, right? And I can hit approve, and that will move it forward to the next step. And if I want, I can also add comments or other attachments or any evidence that I need, which might be helpful later on. I can also delegate this to someone else if I want to. Now, the delegation topic is interesting because it can also, we can define, you can delegate an individual request. We can have out of office, and we can do delegation there, or we can have a permanent delegate, like say, C-level executives don't like doing this. So we can define a permanent delegate for them as well. And we can do it that way. So here I'm going to go ahead and approve, and I could also approve this from my email. So let's log in as a security manager at this point. And there's like lots of notifications going on. So when I approve this, if this is a application which has a connector, then you will see this access being granted in the next few seconds. Okay, so we're done. There's a notification that came through that this access was approved, when it was done, and so on and so forth. And so that's the request approval part. So I want to show you something else that we're working on, and this is what's going to be in the next release that we do this summer. So just give me 1 second, and I'm going to. This is we have created a Teams integration, which will let you get your notifications on Teams directly. And 1 second. Guys, 1 second. Just authenticating into so we have so in the Teams integration, there's two things. One is we can receive notifications as they're happening right in Teams, or I can go and get my list of requests which have been approved, and I can see the integration here, and I can just go ahead and accept and approve the request in this way directly from Teams. So initially, we're going to support Teams, and then step 2 is going to be to add Slack to this as well. Okay. So last step, let's go and do an access certification. So the foundation for the access certification was created by all the data that we loaded, from our connectors early on. So if we're, doing a synchronization from AD and from the various systems, that foundation has already been created. So to execute a campaign, all I need to do is just go to access certification, create a new campaign. And I have a choice between doing a user-based certification or a application-based certification. A user-based certification means that I'm picking my user population and I want to certify all the entitlements. The application one really is more of an entitlement-based certification. And in reality, we see customers using both. So like, the quarterly reviews are usually the entitlement-based because they're more sensitive and things that we need to verify. And usually once or twice a year, companies will do a user-based cert to kind of make sure that the overall access has also been reviewed. Okay. So in this case, let's say we're going to do this quarterly, and this is the email template I'm going to use, and I'm going to make, this guy the UAR manager. The UAR manager in this case is the person who it's a person who's going to be interfacing with the auditors. It's they're extracting, getting the the audit done and getting the reports to them and is the interface, right? So they need to have oversight over how the campaign is going to work, right? So in this case, let's say I'm going to have AWS as one of the applications that I need, and then I'm going to pick AD as the other one. And then I'm going to pick some specific entitlements in each one. So let's say I want the contractors group, and I also want local or domain admins. Okay, I didn't double click on the contractors one. And in AWS, we'll just pick a few here as well. Okay. So next part is to kind of define the reviewer flow. So in this case, I'm going to say that maybe the user supervisor is going to be the first person. We'll give them 3 days. We'll send them a reminder afterwards. And then we do an entitlement owner. And then we'll do the same thing for them as well. Right? So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save my campaign, and then I'm just going to go ahead and execute it. So there's a question that says, I notice that you're using the IDP from OpenIAM. Is it possible to log into an external IDP? And is there any kind of discovery service where the users select their company IDP? So yes, you can plug in. You can definitely plug in a third-party IDP like an Okta or a Azure if you're using a service there. So in that respect, OpenApp can become a service provider to your IDP. As far as IDP discovery goes, we are doing this at some customers today where they have global deployments and different customers are using different IDPs. It is possible that functionality is kind of evolving a bit more. So in the next release, you'll see a significant jump in that capability in terms of the backend work that goes on and the ease of use to setting it up. But yeah, you can definitely do that. So, okay. So if we execute this, so this is going to go ahead and send out notifications to the different people, and I can validate that the campaign ran. So, so in this case, there's a few which are already underway. And the reason that they're done is they're probably auto approved already. Okay. And so let's log in as Jack, and we can kind of see what the approval process looks like. Okay. And then we can just spend a couple of minutes on the roadmap. So it's the reviewer, the review request is going to come into your My Approvals, just like all the other requests did, right? And so if we go to the end, actually, sorry, I'm in the wrong place. My bad. Go to user access reviews. That's what it's supposed to be. We'll see the dashboard of, where each review stands. So this is the one that we just did, right? And if we kick this off here, I'll see the things that need to be reviewed. So at this point, I can go one by one if I want to, and I can open up the details. I can compare people. I can see the reviewer flow, when it needs to be done. Right? Alternatively, I can also go to the pivot view and I can see all the users side by side in a matrix, and I can compare them in this way, right? Generally, this is going to be a lot faster to kind of get through. And all the details that you need are still there. So you can still look at an entitlement detail, You can still look at the user's details here and who they are. So there really isn't that much of a trade-off in kind of going down this path, right? It's just that it's just a little bit easier. And for the Uar Manager, there's, you know, you can see that an overview of where things are at. And let's say, for example, if we wanted to, reassign all of, Jack's, approvals, right? I can go ahead and I can delegate this to someone else if I want to. I can also send out an email to people from here as well. So I can do basically the administration of the campaign can be done from one place. Okay. So we only have a few minutes left. I just want to spend the last couple of minutes on where we're going in terms of the roadmap and answer any questions that you may have. So there's a question that says when a user is created an OpenIAM and it registers an AD, the user login name and user logon name have different user names. In OpenIAM self-service, the user can log in with the user login name on the Windows computer. On the Windows client, the user, there's no issue with this. You can have separate user IDs that so basically the way the identities are stored is that there is a different identity per managed system. There's also support for a legacy ID if you want to, and you can configure OpenIAM so that it has it uses the directory-based authentication, so that you can log in with your AD ID if you want to. So yeah, you can certainly do that, and this you can even do with the community version if you wanted to. Okay, let's just jump to the end. So there are two releases which are kind of being worked on with it, and this is almost always the case. So there's a minor release which is one which we're planning for it's September, and this is already in the works. And so a major new feature there is going to be the contractor management. That's being added into this. There's some minor improvements going on into the RBAC model. So and the improvements are really more on ease of use in terms of the level of work that we need to do in the Groovy scripts and the policy maps that the managed systems have. So when we're basically sending in the data, that it's a lot simpler on the scripts, and the amount of effort that the implementer has to make is going to be significantly less. And on the business rule side, I think we're just making the UI a little bit more easier to use, right? With each major release, each update, we always do a stack upgrade. And the idea is to kind of have the maximum amount of support in life, out of a specific version, right? So this way, the infrastructure stack that we're running on doesn't get old, dated over time. And the other part is that there is, and this was kind of introduced in the current version, but it's kind of getting built out a little bit more, is support for basically radius authentication. Okay. In November, there's going to be a major release that's coming out. This is something which we've already been working on for a bit, and we'll be entering QA in about 6 to 7 weeks on this. So one is the self-service interface is going to get migrated over to a framework called React. There's some usability improvements there as well, so that will be hopefully a little bit easier, for people to use, and better in performance. There's some architectural changes which will boost performance. I think we're targeting about 100% improvement in performance on basically most of the core operations. On the authentication side, there's some very large changes here. So one is the true passwordless authentication is supported, and the adaptive auth framework now is leveraging a machine learning framework. So we can do things like behavioral patterns, and combine that with the rest of the adaptive auth framework that we have. There's a descriptive analytics dashboard that will be introduced into this release as well. Access certification is getting upgraded a little bit in the sense that it'll be integrated with the segregation of duties functionality, which is also being introduced, so that you'll be able to get warnings about policy violations from there. The certification UI will also tell you what's changed from the last campaign that you did. So this will, again, help save people some time in the review process. Okay. The Teams integration we talked about already. The uh, we'll add a SCIM interface to OpenIAM. So we already have a SCIM connector. We've had that for a couple of years already. But in this case, so if you wanted to provision to OpenIAM, you can basically use the SCIM interface if you want to. And it will kind of create a more of a standards-based way of kind of integrating with OpenIAM if you want. The vault that we use, which is HashiCorp's vault, we've had a number of requests from customers where they wanted to use a third-party vault, like particularly it was CyberArk, where they wanted to leverage the vault that was already in their PIM-PAM solution, right? So this will give them the option to plug in a third-party vault. On the CIAM side, we've kind of added consent management and identity proofing into this. And a major new component of this is going to be kind of an introduction of an early privileged ID solution, where you'll be able to SSO into your Windows and your Linux boxes, record your sessions, do have playback, have controls over what command